but sparkling clear morning at Cape Canaveral. Here, the last seconds of the countdown.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
All the communications between the shuttle and mission control indicated everything was going fine.
In 1986, the world was stunned by the Challenger space shuttle disaster when the spacecraft exploded shortly after launch. Everyone assumed that it was a complex technical failure. He started with the simplest things. Instead of delving into technical reports, Feynman decided to experiment in the simplest way possible. He took an O-ring, believed to be the primary cause of the failure, and immersed it in ice water. Then he squeezed it with his hand to feel if it had hardened. The result was surprising. As the temperature dropped, the O-ring became brittle and fragile, which explained why these O-rings could not seal the liquids under cold conditions during launch. Feynman presented this experimental result at the investigative meeting and told everyone, "We don't need complex theories to explain this. It's just a matter of basic physics." His simple experiments helped the world understand the true cause of the disaster, and Feynman proved that sometimes the truth can lie in very simple things if we are brave enough to look at them honestly. Even just the story above gives you an idea of the difference in thinking of one of the greatest men of the 20th century, Richard Feynman. He was one of those who had a profound influence on the generations that followed. In 1998, after returning to Apple, Steve Jobs increased the annual advertising budget to $100 million and launched the Think Different advertising campaign. A photo of Richard Feynman was used in a series of Apple posters. It can be said that Richard Feynman was the most beloved and admired theoretical physicist by the tech geniuses in Silicon Valley. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, believes that Feynman's vivid explanations made physics clearer and more interesting than anyone else's. He called Feynman the greatest teacher I never had. Sergey Brin, the founder of Google, has admired Feynman since he was young. He believes that the story of Feynman's life motivated him to devote himself to technology and had a great impact on the trajectory of his life. Larry Page, another founder of Google, also greatly admired Feynman's work. And finally, Elon Musk, the so-called real-world Iron Man, who has created wonders in business with a physics mindset, is also a fan of Feynman. Musk says, "Everyone should read Feynman's books." One of the factors that made the United States the world's #1 superpower was the invention of the atomic bomb. And in 2024, we learned about Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, through the eponymous film. In 1942, at the age of 24, while still a graduate student, Feynman was invited to join the Manhattan Project, a secret US military project to research and develop the atomic bomb. In his later years, he was invited to join a presidential commission to investigate the Challenger space shuttle disaster. If in the 20th century, Einstein was synonymous with the theory of relativity and Stephen Hawking with the theory of black holes, then Feynman's name is associated with quantum electrodynamics. For his research, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1965. However, while both Einstein and Stephen Hawking were believed to have some of the highest IQs in the world, at over 160, Feynman's IQ was only slightly above average, around 125. In fact, after hearing someone call Feynman the smartest man in the world, his mother exclaimed, If my son is really the smartest man in the world, then please God save the world. But if there were a poll for the most charismatic scientist in the world, Richard Feynman would probably be the top contender. The reason is simple. His appeal is unique. Of all scientists, he is the one you cannot help but love from the bottom of your heart. Not only was Feynman an outstanding physicist, but he was also an accomplished bongo player, a humorous professor, and an excellent educator. He was considered one of the best science communicators of the 20th century. With an insatiable curiosity about life, Feynman was always full of passion, loved challenges, and when he played all out. We will explore two great mysteries in Richard Feynman's life. How did he achieve such great accomplishments despite having only a modest IQ? How did he make his life so interesting and colorful? Family as the foundation, the making of Richard Feynman. Now, let's delve into Feynman's first secret. This genius was raised in a very special way from a young age. Being Jewish, his father was passionate about science and was also his first teacher. From the time Feynman could walk, his father brought home many small bathroom tiles in various colors and played dominoes with him. Feynman would then push one end to make them all fall down. When he became proficient, his father wanted him to arrange the tiles in more complex ways, with the rule, every 2 white tiles followed by 1 blue tile. When Feynman's mother saw this, she said, "Oh, come on, leave the poor boy alone. If he wants to put the blue tile, let him put it." But his father replied, "No, I want him to see what the rules of a sequence look like and how interesting they are." It was a form of basic mathematics that his father taught, even though Feynman was just taking his first steps. Most parents would teach their children to count 1, 2, 3, 4, but Feynman's father was different. He always found ways to show his son how interesting the world was. Feynman recounted, "We had a set of Encyclopedia Britannica at home. When I was little, my father would sit me on his lap and read to me what people wrote in it. For example, when reading about dinosaurs, Feynman's father paused at the description. This dinosaur was 25 feet tall and its head was 6 feet wide. Then he said, "Now, let's see what that means. If this dinosaur stood in our yard, it could poke its head into the second-story window. But its head is too big to fit through this window frame." His father always tried to translate everything from books into real-life images that his son could visualize. Feynman found it fascinating to know that there were once such large animals, but they were all extinct and no one knew why. Thanks to that, he no longer worried that a dinosaur would crawl through the window while they were talking. He learned from his father that everything read should be tried to understand its true meaning, and that should be illustrated with real-life examples. When Feynman saw a bird in the forest, his father didn't just tell him what the bird was called in Italian, Chinese, or Japanese. His father taught that knowing the bird's name in many languages only showed how people in different places called it. What was more important was to observe what the bird was doing. Why was it plucking its feathers? Was it spreading its wings after flying, or was it because lice were bothering it? From a young age, Feynman was taught by his father the difference between knowing the name of something and truly understanding it deeply. Learning didn't just stop at knowing concepts, but had to observe, discuss, understand the rules and principles of operation inside, as well as how everything connected to each other in nature. That was how his father educated him from a young age, without pressure, just interesting observations and discussions. It was this that motivated Feynman throughout his life, made him interested in all sciences, and led him to great success. In addition, Feynman also had a wonderful mother who always encouraged him to experiment with anything he wanted. He built his own small laboratory at home from the age of 10 and often conducted strange experiments in his room. Sometimes he almost burned down the house because of those experiments. When his mother's friends asked, "Aren't you afraid Feynman will blow up the house?" his mother replied, "I'm more afraid of killing my son's curiosity than blowing up the house." The art of learning. Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize winning physicist behind the iconic book Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, was not only renowned for his groundbreaking scientific contributions, but also for his uncanny ability to break down complex ideas into simple, understandable concepts. Feynman employed a unique learning technique throughout his career. A prime example is Scott Young, who managed to complete MIT's computer science curriculum in just 12 months through self-study. He credits the Feynman technique for his accelerated learning. The core idea behind the Feynman technique is straightforward. Don't just memorize, truly understand. Once you grasp a concept, recall becomes automatic. Feynman technique. Step 1. Choose a concept. Select a topic or concept you aim to learn and write it down at the top of a blank page. This technique can be applied to any subject, from physics and mathematics to history and business. Step 2. Pretend you're a teacher. Imagine you're explaining this concept to a 10-year-old. Write down everything you know, but use simple language, avoiding jargon. Simplicity is a sign of deep understanding, while jargon often masks a lack of comprehension. The goal is to make the concept tangible and easy to grasp. Step 3. Identify knowledge gaps. If you hit a roadblock, return to your source material. Review textbooks or consult an expert. Continue until you can explain the concept fluently. Step 4. Refine and re-explain. Review what you've written. If it's unclear, you haven't fully grasped the concept. Use analogies or metaphors to clarify. Strive for conciseness and simplicity. Finally, try explaining it to someone else to test your understanding. Feynman famously quipped, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." Applications of the Feynman technique. The Feynman technique wasn't just a study method, it was a cornerstone of his teaching philosophy. Feynman recounted hiring his 3-year-old sister as a teaching assistant for 2 cents a week. He taught her arithmetic, astronomy, and even centripetal force using a spinning cup of water. She eventually earned a PhD in physics and became a NASA researcher. Feynman's classic experiment. In the 1986 Challenger disaster investigation, Feynman demonstrated the power of simple explanations. In a live televised hearing, he submerged a critical O-ring in ice water to simulate launch conditions. The O-ring lost its elasticity, proving that cold temperatures had caused a fuel leak. This simple experiment made a complex issue understandable to the global audience. Feynman was not only a brilliant physicist, but also a gifted educator. His classrooms were always packed with students eager to hear him simplify complex ideas. If there were a Nobel Prize for teaching, Feynman would undoubtedly be a top contender. The Feynman technique offers a powerful framework for anyone seeking to deepen their understanding of any subject. By breaking down complex concepts into simpler terms and teaching them to others, we not only solidify our own knowledge, but also empower those around us. Feynman's third secret: the pursuit of truth. Feynman asserted, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." Unconsciously, we often believe what we want to be true, rarely scrutinizing our own opinions, and tend to stop seeking when we hear what we want to hear. Consequently, we are the most easily deceived. If you get angry when someone tells you you're wrong, you're probably wrong. The less evidence we have for our beliefs, the more stubbornly we cling to them. Even if you're a brilliant scientist and your theory seems highly intelligent, don't be complacent, because it could still be incorrect. Feynman once said, "Not trying to disprove your beliefs is a dangerous form of self-deception." That's why he often laughed at himself and embraced his ignorance. Feynman was a computational genius with lightning-fast mental calculations, but he also admitted to having a terrible memory. When invited to the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, he believed they had overestimated him and declined the offer. In fact, Feynman considered his Nobel Prize-winning work on quantum electrodynamics to be a mere trick because it left so many unanswered questions. Returning to the Challenger disaster, Feynman discovered that deception had led to the tragedy. NASA managers had been warned by engineers about the problems with the O-rings in cold conditions, but the decision to launch was based on optimistic assumptions and a desire for success, ignoring the warning signs. Perhaps NASA had tried to deceive the government to continue receiving funding, or they had deceived themselves by dismissing the warnings. Feynman understood how easy it is for humans to overlook the truth, even when it's right in front of them. He said, "Belief in the conclusions of experts is also a form of self-deception." In his work, Feynman always maintained a serious attitude and was not afraid to argue with anyone. While working on the atomic bomb project with great physicists like Niels Bohr, he noticed that everyone was so reverent of Bohr that no one dared to argue with him. But Feynman, then just a 25-year-old without a PhD, was always ready to challenge Bohr whenever he saw flaws in Bohr's thinking. Feynman believed the only authority recognized is that of the facts. He was so focused that he forgot about social niceties, simply stating, "If it's right, say it's right. If it's wrong, say it's wrong." In science, Feynman asserted, "The hardest thing is not to fool yourself, and if you can't fool yourself, you can't fool anyone else." Feynman once criticized a friend who was studying cosmology when his friend worried about not getting funding because the research had no practical applications. He said, "You can't expect others to fund research that doesn't serve them. Absolutely do not deceive to gain fame or fortune." Feynman's endless curiosity and joy of discovery. Next, let's delve into another secret of Richard Feynman: his insatiable curiosity and joy of discovery. Feynman was incredibly curious. Once he read an article stating that police dogs have exceptionally keen senses of smell, and he wondered just how sensitive the human sense of smell was in comparison. Intrigued, he knelt on the ground and sniffed around like a dog. His experiments concluded that while police dogs indeed have superior olfactory abilities, humans aren't as inept as they might think. The issue was simply that our noses were positioned too high above the ground. Feynman's thinking was both simple and profound. He always found it more exciting to acknowledge his ignorance than to pretend he knew everything. As he once said, "I can live with doubt and uncertainty and not knowing. I think it is much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. For him, not knowing was an exciting opportunity to explore, or at least to savor the intellectual thrill of seeking answers to unanswered questions. His insatiable curiosity turned his 69 years on Earth into a colorful and exciting adventure. Beyond being a brilliant physicist and passionate professor, Feynman was also, at various points in his life, a safe cracker, an artist, a skilled juggler, and a Mayan hieroglyphics decipherer. At 24, while working on the atomic bomb at Los Alamos, Feynman taught himself to open safes and became a master thief as a hobby. He studied the inner workings of locks and learned how to crack safes. Eventually, there was hardly a safe or door in all of Los Alamos that he couldn't open. His peculiar behavior made the world's most secret nuclear research facility feel like it was facing a formidable adversary. In highly serious meetings of the Manhattan Project, he would stand up and say, "I have a very important announcement to make. The safes are really not secure and we need to get a better lock." From a young age, Feynman was curious about how everything worked. As a 10-year-old, he bought old, broken radios from charity sales to tinker with, and became so skilled at repairing them that his reputation spread throughout the neighborhood, and he became a part-time radio repairman. When a customer asked him why he was just standing there without taking the radio apart, he replied calmly, "I'm thinking." After a while, and to the customer's astonishment, Feynman took the radio apart, made a few adjustments, and the radio played perfectly. That customer became a lifelong fan of Feynman, introducing him to other jobs and constantly telling people that Feynman was a genius who could fix radios with his mind. Later, when he had become a renowned professor and a Nobel Prize winning physicist, Feynman stood on stage in front of hundreds of colleagues and students, passionately playing the drums to accompany a student play. The pinnacle of his drumming career was a ballet performance with his drum accompaniment, which won second prize in an international ensemble competition in Paris. What about Feynman's artistic endeavors? Feynman recounted that in school, the only thing he could draw were pyramids in the desert, meaning mostly straight lines. Later, by chance at a party, Feynman met an artist named Jerry. The two quickly became friends and made a deal. Feynman would teach Jerry physics, and Jerry would teach Feynman to draw. Feynman was 44 at the time. While Jerry made no progress in physics, Feynman, on the other hand, was praised by his teacher for being very intelligent and talented. Feynman's paintings were later sold in the most upscale galleries in the city. The art world even organized an exhibition dedicated solely to Feynman's work. Feynman humbly said, "If I weren't a professor, I wonder if people would have praised my paintings so much." Feynman's joy of discovery also led him to another passion: deciphering Mayan hieroglyphs, an ancient civilization of Mexico. He said that deciphering things like that was very exciting because when you start, you don't know anything, you don't have any clues. But then you realize that this symbol represents this number and then other numbers. Later, a professor at UCLA who organized seminars for physicists realized that these seminars were too purely technical, and she had the idea that physicists needed more culture. So she planned to hold a seminar on Mayan mathematics and astronomy. She called a specialist in Babylonian mathematics and asked him to introduce her to an anthropologist or historian who could lecture on Mayan mathematics and astronomy. But he introduced her to Feynman. She nearly fainted. She was trying to bring more culture to physicists, and the only way to do that was to invite a physicist. When he won the Nobel Prize, Feynman shared, "Actually, I've been receiving awards for a long time. The award is the joy of discovery. The prize is the excitement of the process of discovery and the observation of others using it. Those were the real rewards." Feynman lived his life of curiosity until the very end. He lived another 10 years and continued to work and contribute, starting with his first cancer surgery in 1978. A near miracle for someone with such a rare and unusual form of cancer at that time. Feynman died at the age of 69, despite a life filled with challenges such as language barriers, religious discrimination, the death of his wife, and cancer. In his final years, he lived an optimistic and colorful life, enjoying being himself, doing what he loved, and exploring what he was curious about. His life story perhaps breaks our traditional views of success. We often think that great achievements must be accompanied by arduous struggles. But Feynman showed us that great things can also be achieved through the joy of discovery and insatiable curiosity. Just enjoy life in your own unique way and explore the mysteries of the world with the curious eyes of a child. The world will reward you with wonders. Before we conclude, I'd like to share a heartwarming story about Feynman's love for his first wife. Feynman is perhaps the only physicist who ever said, "Physics is not the most important thing, love is." Feynman met his first wife, Arlene, while they were still in high school. Throughout their college years, they were in love and promised to marry. However, Arlene was diagnosed with tuberculosis and was only expected to live a few more years. Despite his family's fierce opposition to Feynman's decision to marry, especially his mother, who feared that Arlene's tuberculosis could spread to him, Feynman was determined to marry Arlene. They held a simple ceremony in an office, witnessed only by two strangers they had met by chance. None of their family or friends attended. After the wedding, Feynman was busy with the Manhattan Project, so he brought his wife to a hospital near the research facility for easy care and visits. Each time she saw her husband's gaunt face, Arlene would sadly ask, "Darling, can you tell me what you're working on?" Feynman always smiled and replied, "I'm sorry, I can't tell you." Arlene passed away on June 16, 1945, just 3 years after they were married. Feynman was heartbroken by his wife's death. 18 months after Arlene's death, he wrote a very touching letter to her, asking that it only be opened after his death. The letter had a postscript that read, "My darling, please forgive me for not sending this letter because I don't know your new address." In 1965, when Feynman received the Nobel Prize in Physics, he shared in an interview, "I want to thank my wife. In my heart, physics is not the most important thing. Love is." Feynman also wrote a book that I highly recommend to you. The book is titled, "Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman." It's a collection of autobiographical anecdotes about Feynman's life, written in his witty and intelligent style. Behind the humorous stories, you'll gain a deeper understanding of Feynman's thinking and what constituted his genuine knowledge. This book has been recommended by many famous people, such as Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Ferriss, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and S.G. Brand. Finally, thank you for watching. I hope this video inspires you. Goodbye, and see you again.